Picture the night sky roughly 50,000 years ago, stretched over a very different Earth. Across that darkness, small fires are burning in places you might not expect. Some belong to Neanderthal communities in the forests and river valleys of Europe. Farther east, other fires burn among people connected to the Denisovan lineage. On an island in Southeast Asia, a much smaller kind of human may still be shaping stone tools. Elsewhere, Homo sapiens groups are entering new territory, adapting as they move. None of these people know that only one human lineage will remain alive into the present. For simplicity, we often call them different human species, although the boundaries between species, populations, and lineages remain debated. In that moment, the labels matter less than the lives behind them. They are hunting, teaching children, caring for injuries, and gathering around fires of their own. Homo sapiens is not the oldest branch of this crowded human family. It is not the strongest, and it is not the only one capable of controlling fire. Other human lineages already possess tools, complex communication, and rich social lives. Travel back to that night, and you would not see one winner surrounded by evolutionary failures. You would see several successful kinds of humans sharing the same planet. Humanity was not one shape, one culture, or one survival strategy. It was a branching family whose members sometimes avoided, competed with, and mixed with one another. Family reunions, had they happened, would have required an unusually large seating chart. So why did Homo sapiens become the only surviving human species? The answer is not especially flattering, but it is more interesting than simple superiority. It was probably not one invention, one battle, or one uniquely brilliant brain. It was a long process in which some populations gradually lost the ability to recover. Before we can understand our survival, we must remove the most comfortable explanation. Homo sapiens did not simply survive because everyone else was unintelligent. Neanderthals controlled fire deliberately and skillfully. They produced complex tools designed for particular tasks, not random stones with optimistic marketing. They hunted large animals that required planning, coordination, and serious physical courage. They also cared for injured group members who could not have survived alone. Some archaeological evidence suggests symbolic behavior, although several famous interpretations remain debated. Claims such as deliberate flower burials should therefore be treated as possibilities, not settled facts. The larger point does not depend on the most dramatic version of the evidence. Neanderthals clearly possess sophisticated behavior without needing to resemble modern people in every detail. Homo erectus survived across enormous distances for nearly 2 million years. A lineage that durable cannot reasonably be described as an evolutionary mistake. Denisovans left a sparse fossil record but a substantial genetic legacy. Their DNA also contributed adaptations that help some living populations function at high altitude. Homo floresiensis endured for a long period within a highly unusual island environment. Island conditions can favor smaller bodies and specialized ways of using limited resources. These lineages survived for hundreds of thousands, or even millions of years. That is not what simple incompetence looks like. The real difference was probably never that Homo sapiens could think, while the others could not. The better question concerns what happens to an entire population during repeated, grinding crises. Extinction does not reward the smartest individual in the valley. It acts on whether enough people remain to reproduce, cooperate, move, and preserve knowledge. A solitary genius is still a solitary person with no rescue team. A brilliant solution also disappears if nobody survives long enough to teach it. Intelligence can solve a problem on one difficult afternoon. By itself, it cannot keep a small population alive through thousands of uncertain years. To understand why Homo sapiens endured, we first need to understand how human populations actually disappear. Imagine two small human groups living in separate valleys many generations ago. Both groups possess fire, useful tools, skilled hunters, and people who care for the sick. The crucial difference is how each valley connects to the wider world. Group A rarely meets outsiders and depends almost entirely on one local landscape. Its members know few alternative routes, distant allies, or possible mates beyond the valley. Group B has relatives, exchange partners, and familiar travel routes spread across several regions. When conditions worsen, its members can move, reconnect, or obtain information from elsewhere. Its knowledge is not held by one community alone. Now imagine that both valleys face the same brutal winter. The winter does not kill every person in either group, but Group A emerges smaller than before. Fewer hunters remain to bring back food. Fewer adults remain able to raise the next generation. Fewer experienced people remember rare routes, techniques, and seasonal signs. The next bad season does not need to be worse to cause greater damage. A reduced population simply has less room to absorb another loss. This is the model worth holding on to throughout the rest of the video. An environmental shock reduces food, shelter, or usable territory. That loss shrinks the local population. A smaller population becomes more isolated and has fewer potential mates. Isolation also makes resources, allies, and rare knowledge harder to replace. Recovery becomes slower after every new setback. Then the next shock strikes a group that is already weaker than before. A lineage can survive several disasters and still move toward extinction between them. The decisive failure may be the recovery that never fully happens. Extinction is therefore rarely one final battle or one day when the last person suddenly falls. More often, it is a population losing options one by one. This model cannot prove exactly what happened to every ancient human lineage. It does explain why resilience may matter more than any single impressive trait. Homo sapiens may have endured because its options were not all stored inside the same group. When one community enters a crisis, how can another community change the outcome? The answer begins with networks, meaning people connected to people beyond their immediate group. A distant relative can become a possible mate. A familiar route can become an escape from drought or cold. A neighboring group can share information about water, prey, danger, or safer territory. Materials found at early Homo sapiens sites sometimes came from geological sources far away. Stone from distant regions and shells carried inland suggest movement, contact, or exchange across broad areas. That evidence does not prove formal trade systems in the modern sense. It does show that objects, people, or information sometimes traveled well beyond one local camp. Other human lineages also maintained social relationships and exchanged knowledge. Neanderthals certainly lived cooperatively and were not isolated hermits scattered across Europe. The more cautious possibility is that Homo sapiens sometimes maintained wider or more flexible connections. Even a modest difference in network reach could matter during a long crisis. Wider connections reduce the danger of reproductive isolation. They reduce the chance that one local disaster erases an entire body of knowledge. They also reduce dependence on a single landscape that may stop providing enough food. These were not emergency plans designed on a cave wall before disaster arrived. They were layers of redundancy created by mobility, population size, and social contact. Think of an isolated group as one copy of an important file on one damaged device. A connected population stores parts of that file across many separate places. If one copy disappears, another group may still preserve the knowledge, relationships, or routes. Networks did not prevent every local failure. They made it less likely that one local failure would become total failure. A relationship established before a crisis is also easier to use than a connection invented during desperation. Groups that already exchanged people, materials, or information had pathways available when familiar ground became unsafe. But a network matters only when something useful can travel through it. That brings us to the second part of the survival system. What happens to a useful discovery after the person who made it dies? One person learns how to find water beneath apparently dry ground. Another improves the method by noticing a plant that grows near hidden moisture. Several families learn the improved version. The next generation begins from that point, instead of starting again from ignorance. The same process can accumulate across hundreds of ordinary skills. People learn which plants are safe, which stones hold an edge, and which tracks are fresh. They learn how to shape warm clothing, build stronger shelter, and remember difficult routes. No single individual needs to master every skill personally. Knowledge can be distributed across specialists, families, communities, and generations. Human survival changes when useful information outlives the mind that first discovered it. Cultural transmission means not everyone needs to personally lick the poisonous plant. Someone else's terrible afternoon can become the next generation's free safety lesson. A toolmaker also does not begin with a completely untouched tradition. Each generation can inherit a working method and improve one small part of it. Archaeology cannot preserve the lessons, gestures, warnings, or conversations themselves. It preserves tools, materials, repeated patterns, and changes that appear over time. Other human lineages almost certainly transmitted knowledge across generations too. The possible difference lies in the scale, reliability, or reach of that transmission. A larger connected population has more people who can preserve a rare skill. In that sense, population size protects more than bodies. It protects memory. It also has more opportunities for separate ideas to meet and combine. One group may know a better way to make a cutting edge. Another may understand a seasonal route through the mountains. Contact allows both groups to gain more than either discovered alone. Cumulative knowledge, therefore, does more than protect memory. It increases the number of strategies available when old conditions disappear. And that ability to change strategies may have been decisive. What happens when a reliable way of life suddenly stops working? Other human lineages were not permanently trapped inside one environment or one behavior. Homo erectus occupied a vast geographic range across an extraordinary span of time. Neanderthals also adapted successfully to different climates during their long history. The distinction is not that Homo sapiens could adapt while everyone else remained frozen in place. The distinction may have been how many populations, connections, and alternatives remained available at once. During their final periods, some other human populations appear to have become smaller and more fragmented. Homo sapiens populations, by contrast, remained distributed across several regions. Different groups relied on different foods, tools, routes, and local knowledge. When one strategy failed, another population might already be using a workable alternative. That alternative could then spread through movement, contact, imitation, or exchange. Consider the later Neanderthal story without turning it into an invented tragedy. Some communities still knew how to hunt effectively. They still knew how to make fire and survive demanding climates. They still cared for injured and vulnerable people among them. Their problem may not have been a sudden loss of intelligence or skill. Some groups may simply have become smaller and farther apart over time. Every person lost then became harder to replace. Every rare skill lost became harder to recover. A population does not need to forget how to survive before it disappears. It may know perfectly well what must be done and still lack enough people to do it. That is the quiet cruelty of demographic decline. Competence can remain even while the capacity to rebuild is disappearing. Homo erectus offers the same lesson at a larger scale. An extraordinarily successful lineage can vanish when its final populations run out of alternatives. Homo floresiensis offers a related lesson from an island setting. Specialized adaptations can work for a very long time within stable local conditions. Small island populations can also be vulnerable when ecology or competition changes rapidly. Denisovans remind us how incomplete every explanation remains. Their fossils are rare, while their genetic contribution to living people is unmistakable. Survival did not always belong to the lineage with one perfect strategy. It often favored populations that still had another strategy available. Prehistory was not one clean contest with a single cause and a final winner. Several kinds of pressure probably overlapped across different places and times. Climate change altered where water, plants, and prey could be found. Competition increased when different groups depended on the same shrinking resources. Localized violence may also have occurred, although its overall scale remains uncertain. Disease exchange is another possibility, but the evidence is indirect. These were potential shocks, not complete explanations by themselves. Their effects depended on the condition of the populations they struck. A large, connected population could lose one community and continue elsewhere. A small, isolated population might suffer the same loss and never fully recover. That is the hierarchy that keeps the evidence from becoming a random list. Climate, competition, disease, and conflict could create pressure. Population size, isolation, and fragmentation determined how dangerous that pressure became. Networks, accumulated knowledge, and flexibility improved the chance of recovery. Geography, timing, and plain luck influenced which groups received another chance. No single formula explains the disappearance of every ancient human lineage. There is also no evidence for one coordinated global campaign of extermination. A small demographic advantage, repeated across thousands of years, can transform the final outcome. But the story becomes even more complicated when we look inside our own DNA. Many living people carry Neanderthal ancestry. Some populations also carry Denisovan ancestry, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania. These genetic traces reveal that ancient human groups were not only competitors, at least sometimes they met, formed families, and had children together. Some lineages ceased to exist as separate branches without vanishing completely from biological history. Homo sapiens may be the last surviving human species, partly because it did not remain completely separate. Interbreeding is not the single explanation for our survival. It does not prove that every encounter was peaceful or that every population was absorbed in the same way. It does make the phrase last human species stranger than it first appears. Only Homo sapiens remains as a living human species. But other human lineages still leave biological traces within many people alive today. Look down at your own hands for a moment. It is easy to treat this body as the natural and inevitable shape of a human being. For most of our evolutionary history, humanity was much more physically varied. Some humans were heavily built for demanding cold environments. Some were small-bodied island specialists living with limited resources. Others carried adaptations connected to altitude, climate, or particular landscapes. Each lineage had its own history, knowledge, relationships, and way of surviving. They were never background characters waiting for Homo sapiens to become important. Several existed successfully for periods that dwarf all of recorded history. Our present solitude was not guaranteed by evolution. It emerged from a long sequence of fragile, local, and uncertain outcomes. The story could plausibly have ended differently in more than one place. There is a modern echo here, although it should not be stretched too far. Any system becomes fragile when everything depends on one person, one location, or one method. Shared knowledge tends to outlast any individual who carries it. Multiple communities and multiple options prevent one local failure from becoming total collapse. Flexibility often matters more than perfection when the environment refuses to remain stable. Connection does not solve every problem, and larger networks can create problems of their own. Still, redundancy repeatedly turns catastrophe into something survivable. Redundancy can look inefficient during calm years because several groups may preserve similar skills or routes. During a crisis, that apparent duplication becomes insurance. This does not make Homo sapiens more virtuous than the humans who disappeared. It does not transform survival into proof of moral worth. Imagine those ancient fires again, separated by forests, mountains, coastlines, and enormous distances. Most of those fires eventually went dark as distinct human traditions. Yet some of the people around them did not vanish without a trace. Their ancestry still travels inside bodies that call themselves Homo sapiens today. The result is not a triumphal ending. It is a reminder that the last human species is also partly a living archive of the others. So why did Homo sapiens become the last surviving human species? Not because it possessed the strongest body among all human lineages. Not because it owned the largest brain or one unbeatable weapon. Not because of one dramatic invention or one decisive final battle. The strongest overall pattern may be quieter and more structural than any of those explanations. Homo sapiens populations were broad, distributed, and connected enough that many failures remained local. Cumulative knowledge allowed solutions to survive beyond the individuals who first discovered them. Ecological and technological flexibility allowed groups to change when familiar strategies stopped working. Population size, mobility, geography, climate, and timing shaped how well those advantages functioned. Interbreeding sometimes changed what disappearance itself meant. Luck also mattered more than most stories of survival prefer to admit. No factor worked alone, and no single explanation fits every vanished lineage equally well. Together, however, these factors created something more important than permanent success. They created repeated opportunities to recover after failure. This is not a story with one hero, one villain, and one clean moral lesson. Homo sapiens was not chosen in advance to become the main character of human evolution. Our existence today does not prove that our survival was inevitable. Extinction begins when a population runs out of ways to recover. Homo sapiens survived because our options were rarely all stored in the same people, the same place, or the same way of life. The last human species was not the one with the best body. It was the one with the most backup plans. Not because Homo sapiens never failed, but because our failures rarely reached every group, every memory, and every possible way forward at the same time.